Living a balanced lifestyle doesn't have to be a dream, and wellness doesn't have to be an activity you save for downtime. Instead, elevate your personal and professional life with the tips, tools, and insight to holistically support healthier habits. Join me, Dr. Callie Davis, in the Mind-Body Connection for enlightening conversations, inquisitive panel discussions, and illuminating stories from experts in the medical and healing communities who are leading the movement toward a holistic approach to health. Dr. Joe Mather has spent his medical career trying to answer the question, what is the best way to help my patients heal? After a decade of practicing in a variety of settings, Dr. Joe offers patients the very best of both conventional and functional medicine. He has treated patients around the world, mentored physicians, published research, and spoken at national conferences. Due to his knowledge and practical approach, he has frequently sent cases by functional medicine leaders and practitioners across the country. He graduated from the Tulane University School of Medicine and the Tulane University School of Public Health in 2011 and completed his residency in family practice in 2014. In his private practice, he is passionate about delivering cost-effective and practical care with a focus on GI health, environmental toxicity, and preventative medicine. He spends a lot of time helping patients suffering from complex and chronic diseases when other approaches have failed. When he is not working with patients, you will find him playing with his 3 small children, exercising, meditating, or playing the drums. Tonight, we have one of my favorite guests in the functional medicine community back again to talk to us about SIBO. So we have Dr. Joe Mather. We recorded a podcast back in April. I hope that you caught that one. The topic then was disrupting functional medicine because Dr. Mather thinks outside the box and practices outside the box of conventional medicine, but integrating the best of both worlds so that he can help deliver practical solutions to his patients to really get them well. So we're going to start with this deep dive into SIBO tonight. Welcome, Dr. Mather.
Hey, Kelly. Thanks for having me back again.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. We get to talk about one of my favorite things, which is SIBO.
Yes. And I will share with you that as a physical therapist, when I first heard of SIBO, I literally asked, the question, what is SIBO? What are we talking about here? So I had to go and do my research on it because it was never exposed, in my educational background in PT school. So.
Absolutely, and don't feel bad because it wasn't taught in medical school either, and I'm not an old doctor. Right?
Yes.
SIBO stands for Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth, and the name says what it is, but it takes a little bit of anatomy to understand why it's a problem. So the way that the human GI tract is structured is at the top of the GI tract, the stomach, and the upper part of the small intestines have very little amount of bacteria. And then as you travel down the GI tract to the lower small intestine, you get more bacteria. And then once you travel farther down into the colon, that's where you have kind of the teeming ecosystem, the microbiome that everyone is talking so much about. So you're supposed to have a lot of bacteria at the end and not very much bacteria at all at the top. And right, that makes sense because stomach acid, bile, digestive enzymes from the top of the GI tract will clean the small intestines. So what SIBO really is when you have bacteria and other microorganisms growing in that upper part of the small intestines, which is supposed to be almost sterile, very clean. So it's bacteria where they ain't supposed to be.
Yeah, wow. I love the way you just described this because I feel like I just got an assessment from a plumber of like how bad the pipes are. Like it's this bad. It's this backed up. Okay.
And I have a lot of patients with very backed up plumbing, and it could be a huge problem.
Yeah, you're like, oh, what am I going to have to do to fix this?
Yep.
And I didn't even know this was the extensive amount of issues going on in my body.
It's so funny because, one of the ways that I think about patients is kind of a walking, talking digestive tube, right? From mouth to anus, we are a tube to digest nutrients. And it's true that we have organs kind of slapped around that tube and arms and legs sticking out to bring us to food and to put it in the GI tract, right? But at our core, we're just kind of a GI tube.
Love that.
And this is one of the reasons why fixing the gut helps so many other things. It's kind of the central core of who we are as organisms. And it's one of the reasons why I like fixing SIBO, because when you fix SIBO, you can fix a lot of other problems. But maybe to start, it might help for listeners to better understand why it's a problem, right?
Yeah, so let me give us an overall picture real quick, like in society. Were people even saying SIBO like 20 years ago?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so we're kind of dealing with a newer problem, right? That's now under the lens, and now we're understanding a lot more about it with our modern science hats.
That's a really good question. I suspect that versions of SIBO have been going on for as long as there have been humans. Mm-hmm. But I think that this is really a problem of modern lifestyle.
Yes.
And this is why we're seeing more of it now and why it's really exploded.
Yep.
So what happens in SIBO and why it's a problem is that the bacteria that begin to live in the upper part of the small intestines where they're not supposed to, right? They start digesting the food early, right? They ferment the sugars and create gas. So when you eat your pizza, your cheese, and your tomato sauce and the gluten-y delicious crust, right? Those are all broken down into easily fermentable sugars. Mm-hmm. The bacteria, it's like fertilizer,
right,
to the bacteria. They eat up the sugars, produce gas. Then the gas gives you that hallmark bloating after meals, burping, sense of fullness, nausea.
Yes.
And then the inflammation and irregular stools. And, put all together, that sounds an awful lot like IBS.
Right.
And what we've come to learn is that SIBO is present in a good chunk of people with IBS.
Right.
In my experience, maybe about 25% of patients with IBS have SIBO. Other doctors have estimated as high as 80%. I'm not sure I agree with that, but either way, it's a lot. It's a lot of people. And one of the reasons I like talking about it is that it can be fixed. It's not that complicated, right?
Yeah, that's, I think that the general population is more familiar with IBS because they've heard of someone in their family or friend
Mm-hmm.
groups who has IBS. And then SIBO is the less known cousin who's lurking, right, in
Yep.
some of those cases.
Absolutely.
Okay. Got it. That's cool.
I mean, here in New Orleans, just a huge number of people have chronic GI symptoms, and
Yes.
a lot of them have kind of normalized it. It's, I'm always bloated, I always have heartburn, I always have irregular stools, and that's just always what's happened. A lot of them are walking around with SIBO, and they don't have to be ill, right? There are fixes for it.
Right. And back to like those causes of SIBO, like why people have it. So that person who's fatigued, constipated, having some chronic joint ailments, all of that. We see these in both of our practices quite a bit. And so that is the lifestyle picture. They're not getting adequate sleep. They're not eating a quality diet. They might be stressed out to the max. We know in New Orleans we have tons of bars and really good restaurants around to be able to feed our SIBO. Right?
Kelly, this is why I love you. You absolutely nailed it, right? People have SIBO in large part because of lifestyle problems. Mm-hmm. For years, people had the idea that the way to lose weight is to eat small, frequent meals.
Right.
And so you've got generations of people where that's how they would lose weight, is they would not eat large meals, but they would snack kind of around the clock. And what we now know is this is one of the main drivers of SIBO, because the GI tract is supposed to be able to absorb the nutrients, digest the nutrients, have a feeding period, and then a long recovery period.
Yes.
Right, where the motility apparatus can engage and move all the substances downward.
Yes.
It's like a cleaning function on your oven, right? You're baking and then you're cleaning. You're digesting and then you're recovering from it. When people eat small, frequent meals, that whole process gets messed up and we get SIBO. Right?
Yeah. So it's like the snacking generation, kind of.
The snacking
Always
generation. Yep, absolutely. You'll also see it in bodybuilders, right? Mm-hmm. So athletes who are trying to put on muscle, football players, bodybuilders, right? They're eating, high protein diets, and then they wake up in the middle of the night to have smoothies. They're trying to gain weight. And so these athletes are at high risk for SIBO, and I've seen a number of cases where they had pretty bad GI problems, and it was all from SIBO. Yeah.
Yes, that type of case you just mentioned, I could imagine bloating, abdominal cramping, constipation.
Yep, irregular stools, absolutely, and those are, and that's it. So, how we eat can cause SIBO. The types of food we eat can promote that inappropriate growth. I see a lot of patients who have sleep disorders, right? They're not sleeping enough, and that jacks up their sympathetic nervous system, right? And they aren't doing as good a job at creating the enzymes and the stomach acidity to clean the small intestine. So, poor sleep can drive SIBO. Chronic stress can cause SIBO from the same mechanism. And I'm sure you see this with your patients.
Absolutely. The self-regulation techniques that we use whenever we're treating, in my most common population, it would be with chronic pain. But it fits here too. We have to de-alarm that nervous system and help it to come back into a state of safety.
Yep.
And knowing that it's safe and that it doesn't have to run in fight or flight.
Yeah. It's funny, we often talk about the wisdom of the body, but I think this is one area where the body is kind of stupid. You've got fight or flight, and you've got rest and digest, right? Two main ways to think about sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. But what I see is that in the patients that come to see me, so many things have triggered these patients to go away from rest or digest and towards fight or flight. Their GI systems get really messed up and disordered because of the chronic stressors. And when I say the body's stupid, I think the body does a very bad job at discriminating between emotional worry, spiritual pain, infections, right, physical injuries, emotional problems. It will sense any of those things.
Yes.
And just shift over into sympathetic fight or flight.
Yes.
And so people can feel like, why is my body kind of defeating me, and why am I having this come back, and why do I have this? This is happening all over the board, and I think it's part of our culture and society.
Yeah, sure. I mean, looking back, evolutionary perspective, I use the word hardwired a lot in the clinic with patients, because I want them to not feel shame or guilt over their body's natural stress response. Yeah. So I'm like, this is hardwired.
I think that we have that hard wiring, and you bring that hard wiring into 2024 with the processed foods and the anxiety and the politics and the worry and the social media and
the whole environment around us.
It just promotes disordered bodies.
Right.
And so one of the things that happens, we can get SIBO.
Yes. So that's very cool. I love how you zoom out, look at the whole person, and zoom in and look at really what your findings are, what symptoms they're presenting with. And so walk me through like a typical case where that classic SIBO patient who's presenting with the bloating after meals and irregular stools, how do you begin working with them and treating them?
Well, so in functional medicine, we're always thinking, why does a patient have this illness? And so the first thing I'm doing is looking for lifestyle problems. So very quickly, I will screen for sleep problems. I will screen for inappropriate diets. I will make sure that the stress is taken care of. And the truth is that fixing those are sometimes the most important thing to fixing SIBO. And it's very easily missed because those things are hard to fix. Right? Behavior change is hard. And so not to just say that's all it is, because that's really hard for people to do. But past that, assuming that we've got the basics down or at least improved, then I'll want to introduce a variety of treatments. I will almost always have a patient with SIBO trial a fast, right? So 24 hours without eating food to see how that goes for their GI system. And, probably 75% of patients with SIBO will say that their symptoms almost completely go away by 24 hours. So if the bloating and the nausea and the heartburn all dies down when they stop eating, that's a very strong sign that they have SIBO, and it's a very strong predictor that they're going to do well with the other treatments I'll talk about. if they're the 25% who crap out after the fast, it's okay, right?
Yeah.
They don't need to keep doing the fasting. It's not like a
Right.
make or break treatment, but this combats the excessive eating, the inappropriate food, and just lets the GI tract repair. So I lean into fasting for patients who are open to it, and you could stop there for treatment. There are case reports of long-term fasts just making SIBO go away.
Wow.
Right?
I want to pause here because this is profound to me, that fasting is, to all of our listeners, let's think about how expensive it is to fast. It's free. Okay.
You might actually gain money if you are more productive during your lunch hour and don't have to drive to wherever to eat. You might gain money.
Many problems solved in 24 hours. That's it. That is amazing.
So if you're listening to this podcast and you want to solve SIBO, just fast for 2 weeks straight. You'll be fine. There's a proper way to do fasting, but that's exactly it. And these are the treatments that we want to lean into, the ones that are free. And I have patients, I'll have them usually pulse a fast, so a 24-hour fast once weekly. Almost everybody can do that safely. They're not going to run into problems. And if that helps, maybe they do it twice a week, or maybe they push it to 32 hours. So there are ways to kind of work your way up with patients safely. The reason why this works is that you're starving the bacteria. You're allowing your body's GI system to naturally let enzyme, stomach acid, and the repair take care of the bacterial overgrowth. Right? And it will fix itself over time if you stop messing it up.
Right.
This is the reason why elemental diets can also cure SIBO. So elemental diets are medical foods. It's like you can think of like a protein powder, but it's a powdered form of like a multivitamin with all the proteins, carbs, and fats you need to survive. So people have used elemental diets as their only source of nutrition for years and years and years. It's highly absorbed in the first part of the small intestine, right? So right below the stomach, you start absorbing all the protein, carbs, and fats you need from the elemental diet, which leaves the rest of the intestine, the bottom part of the small intestine, without nutrients, and then the large intestine without nutrients. So you starve out everything below that first couple feet of the intestines.
Interesting.
Because SIBO usually happens in the last couple feet of the small intestines, you end up being able to feed yourself and starve the SIBO.
Interesting.
So that's another treatment that works for some patients quite well.
And the elemental diet, okay, I have two questions there. One is, does that specifically help when there is a valve issue, like at the end of that small intestine, or it's just thought to balance it out better?
I see it work in a variety of SIBO cases, so I think it would work independent if someone has a problematic ileocecal valve.
Okay. And my second question is there any particular type that you like? Is that like on your website or your blog that...
There's a bunch of different types out there. Some of the formulas have had changes in the last year, and my patients have reacted more to them than they have in the past. The one I use is from Moss Nutrition. It's called Elemental Select, and that's the one that I find to be the best tolerated by far right now. So that's the one I use in my practice.
Cool. And it would be only consuming that, no other food for that time period?
The study we have showing elemental diets worked, they only used elemental diets, just the formula. But in my practice, you don't have to be that strict.
Yeah.
Right. So some patients will do just fine using the elemental diet, maybe in the morning, in the afternoon, and then eating a meal with their family in the evening.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So they don't have to feel like they're an alien and not able to eat. It really is one of those things where you can kind of mix and match. Some people will do it for a couple days in a row as a reset, maybe a 3-day elemental reset, and then go back to a regular diet. There's a lot of different ways to use it.
Very nice. And I love using the word reset for this whole concept, right? Because it's the rest component and the killing the bacteria where it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. It's important to say not everybody tolerates it the best. I mean, there's a lot of things that you're trying to absorb at once, and so some people can get heartburn. So we just want to make sure that it's a good fit for the patient. But
the specifics of doing their workup and their history
Yep.
and clearing out what hasn't worked before. So that's really the value of coming in and sitting down with you.
Yeah. So we've got fasting, we've got elemental diets, and then we've got maybe my favorite, probiotics for SIBO.
Tell me about probiotics a little more. I know you're kind of like a probiotic guru. Sorry, I'm using the word guru. Do you like the word guru? No, you don't like the word guru.
It's fine. I think it makes me sound fancier than I am, so I'll take it.
Okay, probiotic guru. Let's unpack
Probiotic
that.
guru. So the funny thing about probiotics is that it's counterintuitive in SIBO, right? So patients will say, well, if you're telling me that too much bacteria in the small intestines is the cause of my bloating and burping and diarrhea, then why are you giving me more bacteria?
Right.
The problem is that's based on the assumption that the probiotic capsules you take by mouth are colonizing the gut,
Right.
that they're taking up residence, when in fact that doesn't happen.
They do completely different jobs.
They do completely different jobs. There's a big difference between the Saccharomyces in your yogurt or the lactobacillus in your kimchi than the lactobacillus in a probiotic capsule. When it's grown in a lab, it lacks the ability to attach onto the gut wall. So it can't actually adhere. It can't colonize. And that's beside the point. When you swallow a probiotic capsule, 99% of the bacteria die on first contact with stomach acid.
Okay.
So dead bacteria are not going to colonize,
Right.
and probiotics without adhesion molecules won't colonize. They work instead by training the immune system, and the dead fragments of probiotics work as antibiotics.
Okay, cool. Tell me that. I know that's probably a complex interaction, but can we go there in a simple way?
Yeah, the simplest way is that I've seen enough patients where they come in with a mild positive breath test. I only give them probiotics, and then the breath test normalizes.
Cool.
The only way that happens is if the bacteria die and are no longer fermenting
Yeah.
that patient's food.
Right. And the breath test that's probably something that someone diagnosed with SIBO is familiar with, but for people who aren't familiar with, what does
Thank
the
you.
breath
Yes,
test do?
absolutely. So the breath test is a process where you are analyzing the types of gas that the bacteria are creating in the small intestines. And you do it by breathing into a tube. It's kind of a pain in the ass, honestly. You drink a sugar solution, and as the sugar solution goes down your GI tract, wherever it meets bacteria, you'll produce gas, and that gas eventually you exhale through your lungs.
Got it.
Okay? So people are drinking the solution, and then for every 20 minutes, they're blowing an air sample into test tubes.
Yes, got it.
The problem with the test is that if you have SIBO, it makes you feel horrible,
Sure.
right? A sugar solution to feed all the bacteria that are a problem.
Yeah, not ideal.
And so I don't do as many breath tests as I used to.
Right.
I simply just go ahead and treat the patient if I think they have SIBO.
Right.
I don't want to make them pay money to feel worse.
Yeah, it's like valid check off on paper, but then like you're saying, you're very driven to help the patient's outcome be well again, and
Yeah.
maybe we don't need the breath test really.
Right.
And the probiotics acting like antibiotics, okay. I love that you just informed me more on the specific types of probiotics. So, do you have more to say about that? Like, let's examine.
I'm a guru, of course. Can I tell you the favorite thing I learned about probiotics?
Yes.
And this is something I read about 2 years ago and have done more research to figure out since. Probiotics help with an outrageous number of things that they shouldn't. It doesn't really make sense. Why would you give probiotics and have it help anxiety?
Right.
Have it improve depression and lower blood pressure and lower the A1C in diabetics? Why would
Yes.
it help heal the skin, right? It just doesn't make any sense why something would have effects this big. I think part of it is the immune system, right? But I think a bigger part that we're going to learn in 5 or 10 years and come back to is the fact that the cell walls of probiotics bind to toxins.
Okay.
Right? So when you give certain species of lactobacillus, right, and Saccharomyces, they bind onto endotoxins. One is called LPS. This is really well studied in the medical literature. But past that, they bind onto heavy metals.
Okay.
and mold toxins.
Yeah.
And probably many, many more toxins. Pharmaceuticals, they can bind to pharmaceuticals. They can bind to certain plastics.
Wow.
And I think the biggest reason why people are getting chronic disease, or maybe the biggest unappreciated reason, is just chronic exposure to toxicants.
Yes.
Plastics, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, dyes, solvents, air pollution, particulate matter.
Yeah.
You name it, it's on the rise. And probiotics are one way that we can remove that from our system. So any of those compounds that make their way into the gut or into the bile, if they come in contact with a probiotic cell wall, that probiotic can help shepherd it out of the GI tract.
That's great. I can now think of probiotics as like little detoxifiers.
That's exactly how they should be thought of.
Cool.
And I think that's why it's having kind of outkicking its coverage, or like punching above its weight. Because I think it's really doing jobs that haven't been appreciated by a lot of doctors or scientists. I think that detoxification piece is why.
Nice.
When I treat mold, for example, I put patients on broad spectrum probiotics as one of the first things I do, because I want to heal their gut.
Yes.
But I also want to be kind of sneakily in the background, lowering their overall toxic burden.
That's great. I love that. That is probiotic guru magic right there.
Yeah.
2 for 1. We like all the 2 for 1 things, right? So, what would you say about...
Well, do you want to talk about antibiotics, perhaps?
Yes, let's talk about that. So, on antibiotics, in general, patients are coming to you, and what percentage of your caseload has had exposure to either long-term antibiotics or repeated antibiotics?
Oh, man. Well, let's just focus on SIBO.
Yeah.
A ton.
Right.
And one of the common situations when people come in and I diagnose them with SIBO is that they had been on 3 or 4 courses of antibiotics in a short time.
Right.
SIBO doesn't happen with a single course, right? So people kind of worry about, oh my God, I went to the
Right.
urgent care and they gave me a Z-Pak or Augmentin and I'm going to get SIBO. The gut is stronger than that, but when you kind of are getting closer to 3 or 4 courses in a row, that's where I really worry.
Yeah.
The other situation are teens who are being given antibiotics for acne.
Yes.
So doxycycline, minocycline, tetracycline, those are given consecutively for many months in a row.
Yep.
And that setting in particular leads to a lot of SIBO. So that's a big problem. And so the question is, okay, well, Dr. Joe, you just told me that bacteria in the small intestine are causing SIBO. Then wouldn't antibiotics just fix the problem
Right.
instead of making it worse or causing it? The reason why is that those antibiotics don't kill all of the bacteria, and they don't kill the types of bacteria that really like to grow in the small intestines. So they kind of kill the other things and leave the bad bacteria free to go about their business and take over all of the landscape in the lower GI tract, right? So
Wow.
they're worsening the diversity and letting the bad guys take over.
Creating more damage over the long term.
Exactly.
And is there anything that does kill the bad guys?
Oh, yeah, lots of things. Okay, so the conventional treatments for SIBO work in the right setting. So there's a drug called rifaximin, which is indicated and designed for this use.
Okay.
So rifaximin does work to kill the bacteria. What I see, unfortunately, is that the GI doctors kind of think about this a little short-sightedly. They say, oh, you've got bacteria, we'll just treat you with the antibiotic and you'll be better.
Right.
What happens to the patient is that they feel better when they're on the antibiotic, but as soon as it's pulled away, the symptoms come back. And they say, what the hell? I finally felt better, and now it's back, or even worse. The reason why is that the GI doctor, unfortunately, never did a good enough job pre-treating with probiotics,
Yes.
fixing their sleep, helping them understand their diet is a mess, right? Making sure that they're taking breaks from eating and fasting, and they're not eating around the clock.
Yes.
They never did the prep work. So if you do the prep work, if you get the diet right, you give them probiotics, and then you treat with antibiotics, that's when the results are way, way better. You take away the SIBO and it's gone for a long time,
Yeah.
right? Maybe forever, maybe for a long time. Usually we use combination antibiotics, right? So we'll usually give rifaximin in combination with one of 2 other antibiotics. But there's also herbs, right? So I prefer to use herbs in my practice. They're gentler. rifaximin is crazy expensive. It can be $800 to $900 for a course.
Wow.
Which is just too much for most people. Whereas you can get, a couple bottles of herbs that work just as well for $100. Right?
That our tummy likes.
That your tummy likes, and they probably do other helpful things as well. So I'll use a lot of oil of oregano and herbal blends. I'll use a garlic extract that works really well.
Wonderful.
And then the antibiotics if needed, right? We always have those as options. Some patients have come in and they've been on, biocidin is a common herbal, and they said, I've been on biocidin for 4 months in a row and I'm still bloated. And I'm like, okay, it's time for an antibiotic.
Yeah.
Or conversely, I get a patient who's been treated by a GI doctor and they've just been kind of running their wheels with Flagyl and rifaximin. Mm-hmm. They're usually a good candidate to try the herbs.
Totally. Herbs and lifestyle.
Herbs and lifestyle.
So on the herbal side of things, is there a diet that's best for SIBO, like the actual foods that you would feed your gut to be able to enhance your ability to get rid of it?
The best diet is the starvation diet for the bacteria. So you don't want to give them fiber, is kind of the key. But it turns out that not all fiber is created equal when it comes to these particular bacteria. And so there are certain fibers that cause more symptoms.
Interesting.
And those are the high FODMAP fibers. And so FODMAP is a stupid acronym for fructose and a lot of other scientific sounding sugars, right? That are easily digested by the bacteria. So they cause a lot of gas. So what you want to do is you want to remove the high FODMAP foods, the foods that contain lots of FODMAPs, and replace them with low FODMAP foods. That's my favorite diet. There are others, but that's the one I use the most.
And low FODMAP, or I think of FODMAP as like a bunch of the sugars that you said that the bacteria like.
Yeah.
But that is also inclusive of the right types of fibers. So low FODMAP equals good fibers for the gut?
Yeah, so the idea might be that you could have someone eating a high fiber diet, and some people may tolerate that great. But the people with IBS or who tend to get SIBO, they just can't handle those foods. And it can be really counterintuitive for patients, because a lot of times they'll start eating healthy and inadvertently start to eat a bunch of high FODMAP foods and feel awful.
Yeah.
They'll say, I changed my effing diet. I'm working out. I'm eating broccoli and onions and cauliflower and apples and nuts and seeds.
All the fiber.
I'm getting all the fiber. I'm getting all those nutrients. I used to eat, Wendy's. Why am I feeling worse?
Right.
And they give up. And the reason is all those foods I just mentioned are high FODMAP foods.
Yes.
So it's not that we don't want you eating fruits and vegetables, but we want you to choose maybe citrus fruits rather than the apple, maybe squash and zucchini rather than the broccoli.
I love
and so
that.
on. So we want you eating the whole foods, just not those foods.
At
least in the beginning, right, when you're treating this.
Yeah, I think that's real. It's aimed specifically, but it sounds like it's doable and practical still, compared to other like diet plans, right? Or
I think it's the easiest of all the SIBO diets out there. There's about a dozen different variants that will drive people crazy and nuts.
Yes.
I think this is people get the most bang for their buck. It's not that it's easy to do this. It takes some effort and some thought, but usually I would say for my patients who come in with SIBO, 70% get 40 to 50% relief in a week on the low FODMAP diet. And so if you can do that and they see the result that quickly, they're going to keep going.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Because they felt like shit for years.
Yeah, and I love that you noted that example of eating better, what they perceived to be better than Wendy's, and then feeling sicker. And imagine then the mental spiral that these patients are in, right? Like
they say, F it, I'm not going to eat healthy.
Yeah.
And why would they? If they feel worse, it wouldn't make any sense. But there's always a reason why we have symptoms. And so the key is always just trying to look a little deeper for why is this happening.
Excellent. I love that. I hope that definitely sheds some light on this conversation in people's heads, trying to figure out their gut. So what does not work for SIBO? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So There are, I'm not sure if you know, but there's a lot of stuff written on the internet.
What, do you mean Dr. Google? Are you bringing Dr. Google into this conversation?
I am bringing Dr. Google into this conversation. There's a lot of things that kind of get repeated in integrative and functional medicine circles as truth when it's not. Mm-hmm. And so there's this idea that you have to give prokinetics. So going back to kind of the big physiology of the gut, we talked about how the gut should have time to rest in between meals. And the reason is that rest in between meals turns on the motility of the gut, the process where the little cilia can encourage everything in the gut to move from top to bottom. So things are moving down into the large intestine. So if that motility process is disrupted, we can get SIBO. It's one of the reasons why we get SIBO. So a lot of practitioners have been saying, well, if the motility causes SIBO, problems with motility cause SIBO, I have to give supplements and drugs and medications to improve motility.
Like laxatives.
Well,
or the old school form would be.
Well, so they're different than laxatives. People get them confused.
Okay.
So we're talking about low-dose naltrexone, a low dose of a drug called erythromycin, and then motility blends that usually incorporate ginger and artichoke. There's a bunch of these formulas out there. There's another one called Iberogast. I used these for years because I was taught by people I respected that this was the way to treat SIBO, this was the way to prevent it from coming back. But after doing this for nearly a decade, they just don't work.
Wow, yeah.
And so people take them, and sometimes the herbal components are good for the patient, but I am not convinced it helps prevent SIBO. I'm not convinced you need it to heal. And so I don't use those in my clinical practice. That's one thing that I wish would go away.
Do you feel like that's on the rise, or is it on the decline now that we are finding out more?
I think we're still in the place where people are figuring out what SIBO is. It hasn't cracked the general population.
We're still in the dark.
It's pretty common for kind of health-focused people,
right?
Or people who are ill.
Right.
But I think there's just a huge chunk of the general population who it's just foreign to them.
Sure.
And so because of that, those ideas are still being recirculated.
Yeah, gotcha. And I do want to make a little note here on the motility part from physical therapy practice and just even the movement, right? The kinetic part and the working part. So
I'm so glad you're going to say
the
this.
gut, because I love this super fancy prescription to give to patients for physical therapy exercise, and that is called walking.
A very advanced medical maneuver.
Very advanced. It took us a really long time to figure that out. I'm kidding. But walking is so good, and it helps to spur on mobility of the muscles, the blood flow to the gut, all the supportive factors that are going to help rebalance. But then it also helps with motility, the internal workings and movement of the intestine. And then we can add to that if we need to with some self-manual massage of the gut. There's an I Love You massage that we like to work in here, and it can help with constipation or with those really chronic ongoing constipation cases that might have failed the pharmaceutical approach too. Then we might need to look at pelvic floor sometimes with that too for constipation effects. So I just wanted to give my little movement plug.
You know, the listeners can't hear me nodding vigorously for like the last minute and a half. But I can't agree more. This is one of those lifestyle pieces that I should have mentioned earlier. It's just so easily overlooked. The human body evolved to walk, and the estimate I saw was 14 miles a day as a hunter-gatherer.
Yes.
And now we get maybe 2.
Maybe 1. Yeah.
But all of the explanations that you said, I see every day in my clinical practice. And just can't emphasize enough how important it is that people are getting a baseline level of movement and walking.
Yes.
Particularly when there's constipation.
Yes.
Yeah. I've had some patients literally not heal until I got them walking 35 minutes a day.
Totally.
Right? So there's something that really turns on, particularly in the gut. And these are patients who I'm giving probiotics, we're using antibiotics, we're doing all the other things. And it wasn't until I got them moving every day that things turned on.
Isn't that cool? Mm-hmm. I kind of like it because it's a little, it's kind of like a little ironic, right? That this ancient practice of walking would top all of these modern medicines or work together with them when they're the right ones.
It just tells you that sedentary lifestyle is a cause of chronic illness, right?
Absolutely.
Because when you start walking, things get better. There are chronic people in chronic back pain where the solution they need is to walk,
yes,
to strengthen the posterior chain muscles, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think we could have a podcast an hour on walking.
Oh, we should.
We should walk while we do a podcast.
The walk and talk. Knowing that our guts are just happily
That's right.
thriving in that walking. That's wonderful. So let's talk about if SIBO recurs, because if you've tackled a lot of these issues and they're like the best patient ever and they're sleeping well now and they're doing their lifestyle factors and then they're back in your office again having the bloating and the gut issues.
Oh my goodness, I love this so much because here's the real talk. So one of the problems on functional medicine is the premise, and we treat the cause, and if you treat the cause, the symptoms go away. And that happens, right? Mm-hmm. But it leads to kind of this side corollary where people want to expect that there is one solution that will treat everything forever,
right? And
have them never come back. They want
like
a silver
cure.
Bullet. They want a cure.
Yes.
And sometimes we do cure SIBO. When you catch it early in its lifestyle, you cure it, right? When it happens after a GI infection and you can clean things up and prevent the problems, you can cure it. But the reality is that sometimes you get a 70-year-old with surgical scarring in their abdomen, right? And they've got knee pain and hip pain that means they can't walk. And maybe they're not able to get to the grocery to eat the healthiest, right?
Right.
Their SIBO's going to come back. Maybe someone has a sleep disorder that they can't treat. There are lots and lots of things that we just don't have full control over.
Right.
So SIBO can come back, right? It doesn't always come back, but the reality is that there are some cases where it does come back. Sometimes it's because the doctor just didn't do a good enough job on the lifestyle to begin with. They just wanted to fix it with rifaximin. But when it does come back, if I treat someone and they've come through my office and I think they've done a decent job on lifestyle, we've given them probiotics, maybe we've treated with them herbs, and they got significantly better. A year later, it comes back, right? Sometimes they just need another round of herbs. Mm-hmm. It's like you've got an overgrown, vacant lot here in New Orleans.
Right.
Right? And all the weeds have grown and it just needs a mow.
Yeah, sure.
And so they might just need another course, and they don't need to freak out that they have, gastrointestinal autoimmunity or horrible problems. They just need a clean, right?
Right.
Some patients you do that once or twice and that's all. But there are patients where every 6 months, it seems, they just revert back to this SIBO-dominated small intestine. And I want people to hear that happens sometimes, and it's not the end of the world.
Right.
Because you can simply stack more treatments. It might be that they need a certain fasting regimen to fully clear that. It might be that they need elemental diets periodically to clean it. Or they might even need ongoing herbal treatment for the rest of their life, right? So what this looks like for some patients is they may do a low dose of, say, oil of oregano for a week and then take a week off. And then a low dose of garlic extract and take a week off. Then maybe a low dose of an herbal blend. Maybe a low dose a week off, and then maybe a low dose of monolaurin. That's lauric acid is one of my favorite treatments for SIBO. And that's okay. Right?
Sounds gentle, too.
It's gentle, and it can be really effective. And just like some people, despite doctors' best efforts, need cholesterol medicine.
Right.
Right? And we wouldn't blink an eye at saying, okay, you know what? I'm at high risk for having a heart attack.
Right.
I'm going to take my Lipitor. The same could be done with herbs for the gut. And that's not the end of the world. And it's not defeat. Right.
I actually like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds very positive to say, because of your physiology and your genetics and the way you are as a person, we've tried these things, but this herb is just going to be your friend for life. You just need to take it.
Very safe. And I think that's a really helpful thing for some patients because they go see a doctor and they feel better for a few weeks and they think they got the root cause, and then it comes back. And then they feel so bad. They're so sad. They're so frustrated. And so it just helps to kind of put it in context that this is a manageable condition. So we have the opportunity to cure a good chunk, but even for the people who we can't get it to go all the way away, you can manage it.
Manage it effectively, and not a whole lot of cumbersome things to do there. That's beautiful. So I love this. You walked us through the gut, SIBO, the population, the tricky things about it, why it is so tricky, really. So tell us how people can reach you if they're struggling with their gut and they're having those questions in their mind right now, like maybe this is me, maybe I need to talk to Dr. Mather.
The first thing they can do is go to my website, which is www.drmather.com. You just spell out the word doctor, DoctorMather.com. Or they could come see me. I practice here at the Hands on Health Suite in New Orleans, and I see people in person. I also do virtual consults if people can't drive to get me, if they live in Texas or Louisiana.
Or Australia.
Or Australia. It's hard to drive across the ocean.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think we covered it.
I actually have a little bonus question that just popped up.
Hooray.
Do you have a favorite herb that is like your best friend in the herbal garden that makes your tummy feel the best?
Well, I have a lot of problems, Kelly, but GI problems aren't one of them, thankfully, or yet. I don't know. Who knows? I got to knock on wood. Right. Ashwagandha works the best for my system. So
cool.
It doesn't change GI physiology for me, but
adaptogen.
We doctors tend to be a little type A obsessive lunatics, and
nerds.
We can be high-strung, and I'm no exception. And so we overachieve and try to save the world and put everything on our shoulders. So I occasionally find myself taking ashwagandha for a few weeks to kind of just calm things down. And that really helps my mood,
regulation,
my energy, and my sleep.
Beautiful. That's very cool. We have a local garden here. The name escapes me at the moment. I might plug it into the notes, but they have a lot of ashwagandha that they're growing, and you are invited to come and learn, harvest, and make your own tinctures with the ashwagandha. Speakeasy Farms.
Oh man, I have to go.
We have to go on a field trip.
Let's do it.
Totally.
Oh, that's so cool.
Let's do that. Let's do the field trip, and then we'll come back for another podcast.
Okay.
Okay, great.
With some homemade ashwagandha tea.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Mather.
Thanks, Kelly.